In this video, I'm going to talk about the VanTrue N4 camera and how you can choose the correct card for your camera. It also works with different dash cameras, okay? This is just an example with the VanTrue, but the same principle applies to different dash cams. So basically what I have here is an SD card, it's a micro SD card. This is a SanDisk Ultra, 32 gigs. That's the capacity of the card. So what people don't get correctly is the speed of the card, okay? I see people talking about brands, talking about card capacity, but nobody's talking about speed. And sometimes you get error recording in the dash cam because you don't have the right speed. Let me show you here what I have with this different card. As you can see, here I have the information about the capacity. It's 128 gigabytes. Okay, so much higher capacity, but here is the most important part, the speed of the card. How fast the camera can write on this card. 160 megabytes per second, 90 megabytes per second. You're going to talk about the speed when you see a table that I'm going to show you guys later. But let me just come back here to the camera and explain something else. When you go to the menu here to record setup, we see this resolution for the camera. So this is pretty important so you can understand better how it works. So here I have the different cameras, the front, cabin, and rear. Let's say we want to change the resolution for those three cameras. So I have three cameras on my car. The first one is using 1440p. The second one 1080p and 1080p, okay, with 30 frames per second. That's how many frames I record every single second. It's 30 frames every single second, right? That's also the option for 1080p, 1080p, 1080p as well. And here you can lower down the resolution, 720p for this camera. And here you can increase the resolution, the first one, and decrease here the frames per second. You see that they change here, for example, to use 25 frames per second when you increase the resolution, because the camera is recording more data into the card. So be careful with that. So the card needs to be fast enough to record all of the data. So the idea is to leave like this, for example, that's the default one. Okay, 1440p, 1080 and 1080p with 30 frames per second. And then you can use a fast card so the camera can record on the card without having issues, right? So that's the idea. So I'm gonna talk now about a table. I'm gonna show you guys a table with the different cards, class speed, let's say for C2, C4, C6, C10, U1, U3, different cards. And then I'm gonna recommend here in the description the correct card for your camera so you don't have problem recording to the card, okay? So let's go. Okay, so let's take a look at this table for SD card. As you can see, I have the class speed, UHS speed, application, and write speed. This is very important because as you can see, you have different cards, C2, C4, C6, C10, U1, U3. Those are the speed of the car, the classification for the speed. As you can see here on this right side, you see the speed for 2 megabytes per second, 4, 6, 10, 30, 60, 90. As you can see, you have cards with 90 megabytes per second, which means it's recording 19 million bytes every single second on the card. It's pretty important. So I have a card, an SD card, as an example, you have the information here. This one is for 170 megabytes per second, okay? But be careful because this is the reading speed. I'm not talking about that. So make sure you understand the difference. You're going to record into the card, so you need to be careful with the write speed, as you can see here. So that's important. For this card, for example, it's not 170 megabytes per second for writing, it's for reading. So you need to look for the information. It's not here in the card for some reason. So you need to look at the specs of the card. For example, when you're buying the card, you can see this information, right? This is just an example. We're not gonna use SD card on the camera because we're talking about dash cam that uses this small card here. Okay, so here's the capacity, 32 gigabytes per second. That's how much you can record, the amount of data you can put on the card, but this is not the speed. So you need to look for the information about C10, U1, U3, something like that. It's pretty small here on the card. So when you have a card, you can take a look here. For example, I have one. You can take a look at the information here and you can find somewhere, right? So the card is too small to show it, but here you can see when I'm buying the card, I can see speed up to 160 megabytes per second. Read. Okay, and the write is 90 megabytes per second, which is this one in this table. Okay, so we're talking here about a card that can record with resolution of 720p, 1080p, 4K, 8K even, at 60 frames per second or 120 frames per second. Okay, on the car you usually use the dash cam with 30 frames per second, so you're good here. But be careful, we're talking here about one single camera. In the dash cam, you're recording 3 cameras, recording the front camera, the inside camera, the rear camera, usually close to 1080p. So that's the resolution. So we are still good. 1080p, that's the resolution for the camera, recording at 30 frames per second, not 60, but 30. With 3 cameras, better go with the fast card possible. Okay? So take a look at the specs when you're buying a card. This one is SanDisk. SanDisk is pretty good card, so I see people talking about SanDisk. I prefer to buy, let's say, Samsung, for example, because it's better, but they're not comparing these specs. Okay, you cannot compare cards just by the brand. You need to take a look at this so you can compare apples to apples. So I recommend this card because I'm using it. It works pretty good. I'll leave the link here in the description so you can get yours, because it's pretty important to have the right card on your dash cam. Otherwise, you're gonna lose your data. You're gonna look for in the card later and looking for a recording or something, and it's not there. Okay, so I recommend this. Go to U3 card. The fast one that you can do use, like you have EU3 with 30, 60 and 90 megabytes per second. Go with 90 to be sure you're going with that good card. Okay, so that's all for today. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, leave your thumbs up and your comments, and I see you in the next one.